So, good evening. It is great to be here. Good evening and welcome to Dr. Fred's Welcome to Humanity. So today I'm here to speak a little bit about my coaching opportunity. And I want to also speak a little bit about what I've been up to as far as creating that coaching opportunity. So who I am is a man who cares a lot about people. Really, that's what I'm up to. And I've been caring a lot about people since I can't remember any time before I cared a lot about people. And that goes all the way back to the playpen. It all goes back to when I was 2 and 3 years old and I watched my parents and my brothers speak to each other. And I always saw that I could bring peace. It seems like that I was born to a family that was in need of some peace, and I was born into being that function and to really caring for everybody's opinion, because there was often 4 opinions in my family, and then making some sense out of it. I watched and became completely enamored with the prospect of communication. 2 people would get together, they would make noises, and even before I understood what they were saying, and then whatever was going on prior to that seemed to then alter. So I've been a big fan of communication, and early on in my elementary school days and my junior high days, I really didn't stop communicating. I talked a lot when I was in kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade, and I didn't stop talking. It's always been a strength of mine, or at times, as they say, my greatest strength is my greatest weakness. No teacher was really ever able to stop me from talking. And then I learned how to be pretty funny, and I was reasonably capable in school. So sometimes I would be funny, and I guess they call it smart, but I was talkative. And I really got the power of communication in the world of speaking. And then as time went on, I really started getting that listening was really an important feature. And when I was in junior high, friends used to approach me with whatever was going on in their life. And I could tell that if I listened and if I really heard what it is that they had to say, that I could make a difference. So this was sometimes boys or sometimes girls, and I began to be even more curious. But I knew that I didn't yet know how to communicate. And I was looking forward to the advanced course in learning how to communicate. And that was just in high school. So I thought, oh yeah, when I graduate high school, I'm going to go to college and I'll learn how to communicate. So I graduated high school, and then I did everything I could to go to the local best college, the one that I thought was the best one, which in that case was University of Michigan. And I went there and I learned that communication wasn't that big of a deal, and that most of the kids in my class, or young people in my class, they weren't that interested in communication. They were interested in other sort of college-related activities. And I was really quite disappointed and ended up really bouncing around a little bit, and went out of college, came back in college, went on to college again, went to another college, and eventually I got a job. Years ago, this January, in 1980, I got a job as a child care worker in Pontiac, Michigan at a state hospital. And I worked the afternoon shift, and what I got was that I was getting paid a little chunk of money, and I was in between undergraduate school opportunities, and I was making money for communicating with children. And I finally got that communication was at the heart of all healing. Communication, creativity, connection, compassion, kindness, like being present with somebody, like getting somebody, and then having fun with people, being forgiving, being accepting, all of these things, like really getting the variety of different kinds of people, and some of the misfortunes of people, or the tragedies of people, or the gifts that people had, even those who have had tragic lives, maybe even especially those. And I really liked that job as a child care worker. And I was a child care worker for 4 years. 5 years really, from 1980 to 1985, if you think about it. And I decided that I didn't want to stay to be a child care worker the rest of my life, that I could rise up the ladder and eventually turn into one of the doctors who was running the show. And because I didn't really like the way that they were managing the kids. And what they were doing is we would call them when there was trouble with kids, and they would come by, put something in a chart, and then we would medicate these kids and essentially sedate them for a whole full day or something and make them delirious or groggy or something. And I thought that there was a better way to do it. So I made it my intention to go to medical school, and with the sole intent of becoming a psychiatrist. So that's what I did. And over the next several years, I went to medical school in Chicago, and I then got accepted in a residency in psychiatry when I was done with medical school, which was quite a ride in its first place. And then I moved to Cincinnati and started raising a family. And not to overstep Chicago, it was just such a cool city. I love Chicago. And I moved to Cincinnati and raised a family and built a practice. And I had like the second biggest practice in Cincinnati for over 10 or 15 years. The unfortunate, or maybe just what happened during that time, is that around 1987, when I was still in medical school, the introduction of a drug that you all know of, Prozac, fluoxetine, Prozac is what it was called, took place. And at that point, psychiatry went through what is a massive paradigm shift in retrospect, completely massive. And so from communication and connection being at the heart of psychiatry, from like being with somebody and getting their world being the heart of what healing was about in the world of mental distress, things changed that year, and they changed drastically, and they changed into the world of biological psychiatry. They changed into the world of this notion of chemical imbalances. So being a psychiatrist, during those 4 years that I was in medical school, and then the 4 years when I was in residency, being a psychiatrist, the whole definition of being a psychiatrist flipped on its ear. So I went in 1980 thinking I was going to be someone who really cared and was a master in communication. And by 1988, I started my residency, and then continuing my residency through 1993, biological psychiatry had taken hold of the whole nation. And Prozac was the #1 best-selling drug, all specialties included, for the next 12 years. And there was even talk of putting Prozac in the water system. People really thought that it was a do-all. There was writing that it was the magic pill that was taking away any kind of sadness, and sadness was seen as an abnormality. Now, I never bought that hook, line, and sinker, but I definitely learned how to be a psychopharmacologist. I had a busy life. I had a reasonable debt, and I had children to raise, and I had to take care of myself, and I got myself jobs in multiple different arenas in the world of mental health and in the world of psychiatry. And they're normal. And after getting myself involved in all those multiple arenas over the next right near 30 years, I learned how to do inpatient work. I did outpatient work. I did nursing home work. I did rehabilitation work. I worked with children and adolescents. And then I worked with geriatrics, and I worked with general adults, and I worked in orphanages, and I worked in emergency rooms, and I worked on in prisons and in jails and on the mobile crisis team and in emergency rooms. And I was really all over the map and working in clinics. I had a big old practice, and yeah. And each time I went to one of these places, I learned a lot about how the system rolls. And I eventually became a good reviewer, a utilization review or a peer review or a file and disability review. Worked a little bit with the Bureau of Workers' Compensation in Ohio. And it became more and more dissatisfying for me, but I became competent at something that was massively dissatisfying for me. So there was a huge divergence between what I was competent at and something that I didn't have complete respect for. I never really bought that the issues that people were having were biological in nature, and I also never bought that the medications that I was giving them were helping them as much as they were marketed to. So I was like, wow. And then a couple things happened in 2006 where my life changed again. I started taking people off of medicine, and just because it seemed like they were ready. Took some people, I guess I would call them low risk, people who were functional but still taking medicines. And when I took them off their medicine, their lives just exploded forward. Their diagnosis actually disappeared in many cases. So depression and anxiety, once the medicines were gone, seemed to disappear. And we started looking at these people and really changing the conversation a little bit so that they began to see themselves as normal. And I started doing this with different levels of patients, and doing this a little bit with my more severe, supposedly severely diagnosed, which really meant that they were more embedded in the system and on more medications. And I started taking them off medications if their family and their caregivers agreed. And lo and behold, people just got massively better, like shockingly better. Like we weren't taught that in medical school. But hundreds of people got way better to the point where they got their lives back. And so eventually I closed my practice in 2008, 2009. I thought I would move out of the country and maybe work in New Zealand, and I even pursued a license in New Zealand. But in the meantime, I decided to take on some locum tenens work, which meant going around the country and seeing what I could do to fill in for either doctors that had been fired or they were looking for extending their workforce at a particular clinic or a hospital. And so I worked in Indiana, worked in Michigan, worked in Illinois, worked in Ohio and other areas, and then I got a California license. And really, psychiatry is very similar in every single one of those states. And in fact, the only reason to get hired in any of those states was so that I could prescribe medicines. And as you're hearing, prescribing medicines became less and less satisfying for me. Although I got paid fairly well to put my signature at the bottom of papers, I wasn't really making the proper decisions that people were counting on me to make. I was making decisions that were pre-made for me by the team, by the staff. And I wasn't sure that I was doing the best for my patient. And this was something that was eating at me a little bit. So now, in some situations, I was able to, again, re-inject communication, connection, creativity, compassion, kindness, availability, self-expression, even arts, music, dancing, these kinds of things, like different ways to look at humanity. And we fast forward to these days where I have developed something where I realize that oftentimes the diagnosis itself is the trauma. Like the diagnosis that we give people and the diagnosis that people accept is the original trauma. So people come to the doctor fairly certain that they're off center, that they've gone, by the time you gotten to a psychiatrist, you're normally being referred by another caretaker, caregiver, a therapist or a psychologist or a teacher or a supervisor at work or something like that. And the idea when you get to a psychiatrist is that you're being evaluated for medications. And if the whole group of people before you have determined that you have some sort of condition that regular communication isn't altering fast enough, then by the time you get to a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist is absolutely compelled to medicate you and is listening to certain buzzwords, racing thoughts or depression, sadness, anxiety, sleeplessness, sometimes hopelessness or social phobia or post-traumatic issues. And when we hear those things, we have our next step waiting for us, which medications we're going to start. But I now submit that actually at that point, one of the ways that we could manage this is seeing that all of humanity, including the painful versions, including the things that have us pretty sure that we're different than everyone else, is part of being humanity. I want to say that again, like it is entirely normal to be a human who is pretty certain that they are abnormal. In the course of a life, it is entirely normal to have certain points in time where you are fairly certain that you are completely abnormal. That's normal. And really being able to embrace all of humanity and get that you don't have a diagnosis per se, and that only once you get the diagnosis does the storyline then get activated about that diagnosis. And once that storyline gets activated and one is fairly certain that they have something defective or deficient or affliction based on who they are, then the conversation that ensues after that is one based on being less than complete. And the opportunity is that, or at least the attention is given to trying to fill that completeness with maybe a myth that there is a biological abnormality. Now, what I'm finding now is that being with people, like really being with people, being with their human nature, is where the action is. And by redirecting and reconfiguring, or should I say transforming the conversation of what mental illness means or what mental health is, I'm able to get people to actually not have to go down the conventional route towards psychiatric services. And what I'm saying about that is that what people don't know is that doctors aren't even taught how to take you off medicine. A doctor is taught how to start you on medicine, and the test, I suppose, the unspoken contract is that you would come off of it when you got better, but that's actually not true. If you got better, then they would keep you on it with the idea that don't fix something that's not broken. And if you got worse, the only three choices that we have is that either add, increase, or change medicine. So add a different medicine, increase the present medicine, or actually change to a different regimen. We don't have discontinuation as a response to getting worse. And it's certainly possible that the medications themselves have, as well as the acquisition of a diagnosis, have made people worse. So coming off of medicine or backing off of the diagnosis or actually getting people to see that they're normal isn't a pathway that the general psychiatrist takes, but it is a pathway that I'm taking these days, and I'm doing it with just overwhelming success. Now, the coaching that I do is called mental wealth or mental health coaching, ontological coaching, restorative coaching, coaching that really, given who I've been in the world of psychiatry, given that I really am well versed at all the many angles of how psychiatry is delivered in the nation and in local communities and how decisions are made, I find it that it's very possible that with some guidance, we can get people to come back out of a system that may not be working as well for them as they had hoped. So many people will go into the system and they continue to get worse, or they even get worse faster, or some people get worse gradually, and they're pretty sure that's as good as it's going to get. And the reason they're certain about that is that when they stop medicines on their own, they get a spike of the symptoms that the medicine is marketed to treat. Or when they come to see a new psychiatrist, they get a new diagnosis, and when they get caught up in the system and there is no exit. And what I have to say is that there really is an exit. And the exit comes from maybe backing off of exactly what it is that you're certain you have, or that you're certain your loved one has. And maybe there is no such thing inherently as a diagnosis, that the diagnoses have come in order to support the treatments that are backing it up, which then perpetuate the diagnosis in so many ways. By knowing that you're off and then taking something that not only has you feel less off, but perhaps even makes you more off, it's a perpetuating and often even causative situation that keeps the diagnosis going and then keeps the treatment going. And that mental health treatment, there are backups in the psychiatric wings going. Sometimes you have to wait months to see a psychiatrist because their offices are full. And they're seeing people who every single month are just hurrying up to get to the doctor to get to their medicines so that they can stay essentially like functionally unsteady. And that's the best that they're getting, and they're pretty sure that they have an inherent condition. And what I'm suggesting is that the diagnosis and the medicine themselves inherently creates the system that there is a deficiency, and there's a way to back out of that and bring miracles forth. Like really seriously bring back a life that otherwise was thought to be gone in the areas of mental illness. And I've seen it again hundreds of times where people get their lives back and they're pretty certain that they were never going to get it back. Now, another group of people that I work with is the people who are thinking about going into the system. They're pretty sure that they're depressed or anxious, or they're not functioning as well as they should. And they're thinking that they need some help, and they're just barely ready to scratch on the psychiatric door. And my promise during my coaching is that within about 2 or 3 months of ongoing coaching, where I don't write any orders, this is not about me being a doctor, actually. It's about me encouraging people, not about being a doctor anyways in the conventional sense. It's about me so that people aren't dependent on their pharmacology. They're also not dependent on their diagnosis, and frankly, they're not dependent on me. What we do is we create a level of empowerment that gets people to see that it's just really a human nature to have periods of time where there's a lot of pain or even discomfort. And some people say suffering is optional, and that's definitely true. There's a way to embrace humanity so that even the very painful or nearly unspeakable, or even times where there's massive distress, can be seen as part of the expectable and ongoing human nature of what it means to be a human being. When we do that, we give people's lives back. People start seeing that we care, that they can be cared for, that they can be heard, that they can be present, and that in the end is what almost everybody, if not everybody, wants in this world, is to be heard. So generally, when we give someone a diagnosis and give someone a medication or whatever kind of treatment for that diagnosis, we stop listening to them quite as much as we were before they had that diagnosis. And a power gradient gets set up between the mental health system and the so-called patient. And I like to eliminate that power gradient and give people back their lives. So in 2 to 3 months working with me as a mental health coach, what my intentions are, and nearly a promise, is that you will have every tool you will ever need not to ever need a mental health worker again. Never, ever need a mental health worker again. And we're talking about a few different things that go into that, which I can go in with. We're talking about, again, focusing on connection and communication and creativity, detoxification and compassion. And when I say detoxification, I'm not just talking about drugs and alcohol. Sometimes our food or our water or even what we see and what we hear are toxic. And there's an opportunity to really see those toxins and clean those up and get your life back so that you can be powerful again, or so that your loved one can be powerful again. And now I'm finally doing work that matters. And here I am about 40 years into my mental health career. January 5th, 1980 is when I hired at that childcare place. And I'm finally doing work that really matters, and it's really a pleasure. What's interesting, though, is that people listen to all this and they become skeptical because I'm saying something new. And there's a level of cynicism and resignation. There's a level of people actually thinking, no, he can't be right because that is never what I heard. And then they go back and continue to support their diagnosis and support the medications and support the treatments that they're on, even though things are getting progressively worse. And I find that really interesting because the work I'm doing is unique enough that you can't find someone like me. You can't punch in psychiatric coaching in the internet. You won't find anybody. Or you can't punch in non-diagnosing psychiatrist, which is how I call myself now. I feel like the diagnosis, as soon as I tell you that you have a condition, then creating something that has you feel less than, which is not helpful ever, so that the diagnosis itself may be the initial trauma. So the work I'm doing is very effective, and I'm not gonna mince words. I'm looking for customers, people who are ready to get that they don't want to be mistreated any longer. Like people who are ready to get that they might not want to go down the situation which might lead to a lifelong course of having a mental illness. And that the other possibilities exist where empowerment about one's humanity can be encouraged, can be sustained, can be understood, can be even embraced. And that's what I'm about, is embracing humanity. So you can find me at Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net, and feel free to visit my website. I've loaded up a bunch of stuff in my blogs in the last few days now that I'm becoming functionally capable. So I've done some interviews I've done and some audios that I've done and some articles that I've written that are along the lines of what I'm saying. So feel free to check out my blog page. And also you can hit a button where you can set up a discovery call with me. Or you can DM me, direct message me here on Facebook, where I'd be glad to set up a conversation with you about you or your loved one, or someone else you're curious about. And the services are short term. We're not talking about a lifelong commitment here. We're talking about actually reconfiguring the conversation such that you're left alone, or you're left in a possibility of having a world that you didn't know was waiting for you, that leaves you with a new level of capacity, a new level of functionality, a new level of usefulness, a contribution, a way of being functional that otherwise might never have been available to you. And that's my commitment. And I'm deeply committed from my heart for making that happen. And I have several clients now, and each of them are just getting better so quickly. I just love working with these people, and really rewarding to be up to something that matters, and to be able to share it in this way is also beyond rewarding. I wonder how many people are going to watch this, but it's really, oh yeah, that's what's happening. And I get that it's revolutionary, and that's just how I've been bred, to be somewhat revolutionary and to question authority. And it turns out that it's finally working for me. So give me a ring, DM me at Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net, and we can talk about the coaching. I also do public speaking. Some of the bottom lines of small businesses are deeply affected by mental illness, or the notion of mental illness in the business that is affecting the productivity of companies or of small groups. And we can talk about that and reconfigure, or at least have an inquiry about reconfiguring the whole notion of mental illness in those settings. I do some other work as well. I'm a big pioneer and advocate for online communication, telehealth, telepsychiatry. I think this magic can happen here, and I have a methodology that I can show you how to use if you're a mental health worker. And then I'm also an expert witness, and I take on very, very high-powered cases of maybe wrongful things that happen behind closed jails and prisons and inpatient units and hospitals and places, nursing homes, places where things might happen that are worth taking a peek at. And I do evaluations on those and offer opinions, and sometimes even go to a deposition or trial. And I really like that work because it seems like I can make a precedential difference there. We're going to go around the world and see how mental illness is delivered in all the multiple arenas of the diverse areas of our planet. And we'll see then, for once and for all, really, that there is no definition inherently of mental illness, that each and every culture and each and every society deals with their so-called outcasts in various ways that either support them as outcasts or treat them as needing to become mainstream people. But for the purpose of this live, we're really talking about coaching. We're really talking about mental health coaching. So give me a ring if that's interesting to you. Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net, or here, or you can also find me on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel at Welcome to Humanity. There's some pretty cool stuff there as well. And Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, and are probably the best ways to find me is on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. And Instagram and Twitter are a couple steps back at this point. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being on for this time. It's really been a deep pleasure. I'll see you around the corner. I love you, and I really do love you. And everything that's going on for you is part of being human. And it's exactly, unfortunately or fortunately, is what is being served up. Like the challenges that you're having, as well as the pleasures that you're having, are all part of the ongoing human experience. Just what's so, and how you're dealing with it is a variable, and we can really assist you in communication with altering that variable and giving you a life that leads to even a greater sense of mastery, of empowerment, of freedom, which is what you deserve while you're here. And I'm very confident that we can do that and have it be that you don't need mental health treatment if you're ready for that. Now, if your mental health treatment's already working for you and you're happy with it, by all means, I'm not your doctor at that point. I'm really not. I'm not the one you should come to. And congratulations for finding something that works. But if you found that something isn't working, or isn't working as well as you wish it was, then I do really invite you to give me a call. We can talk further about it. Get a free half-hour discovery session, and we can talk about what directions we might want to go. So thank you. Have a good night. It's been a pleasure. Bye for now, folks.